Hi, I'm John Story. Welcome to another episode of The War Story. Today we're going to talk about movies. One movie in particular, Star Wars, Episode 4, A New Hope. So this isn't just going to be one other, of the many reviews of the Star Wars saga. I'm going to focus on the military aspects of Star Wars. In particular, Star Wars is effectively World War II in space, and I'm going to sort of explain why that is the case. Let's take us to the world of Star Wars. It's a science fiction movie, has fantasy aspects, but even if you're talking about science fiction and fantasy, they still have to be realistic enough to make it interesting. If something just is not realistic to the audience, you lose interest. Now, by realistic, I don't mean realistic by our standards in our world, but realistic by the standards that they set. And so, what standards have they set? Okay, this is a world where, yes, there are fantasy elements. You have like the Jedi and the Sith, and they can control the Force. But the Force doesn't let you just click your finger and destroy a fleet of ships. Well, it didn't until like Disney Star Wars anyway. No, the Force gives you an individual some powers, that makes you a pretty good fighter, lets you sort of maybe look into the future and a few tricks like that. It doesn't let you just win a war. So let's look at the organisations who are actually fighting the war. So you've got the Empire. They're big, they're powerful, they have fleets of ships. And they're fighting the Rebel. Now they're called rebels, but these aren't terrorists in some bunker. They have bases, they have a fleet, they have planets that are aligned with them. This is a clash between two large organisations, and only certain dynamics make sense in a clash between two large organisations. Without those dynamics, it loses its believability, it loses its realism, and therefore it doesn't make sense to the audience, and it's not as fun to watch. So a clash between two large organisations, what dynamics are at play? Well, let's have a look. So there's no surprise that the final scene of Star Wars A New Hope was based on the Dam Busters raid, the British raid on German dams in World War II. In fact, it's abundantly clear from some of the visuals and audio that George Lucas was heavily influenced by the Dam Busters movie.
How many guns do you think, Gold 5?
Say about 20 guns, some on the surface, some on the towers.
How many guns do you think there are, Trevor?
I say there's about 10 guns. Some in the field and some in the tower.
But in other respects, the Dam Busters raid really resembles what's going on at the end of A New Hope. So, spoiler alert for the two people in the world that haven't seen this movie. The scene is that the rebels have the secret plans to the Death Star. The Death Star is a giant battle station with the power to destroy a planet. The Empire have found the secret rebel base where Princess Leia and the rest of them are. So it's a race between time. A fleet of rebel X-Wing fighters head off towards the Death Star to try to blow it up, and the Death Star is trying to get within range of the moon Yavin to destroy the base. The rebels have the plans, and they know that there's this trench running along sort of the equator of the Death Star, and there's a port in this trench that if you drop a torpedo down will go into the reactor and blow up the Death Star. So that's the sort of scene. And so there's like, 24 or something X-Wings. Okay, so you're seeing from this action that we're not talking, super sophisticated weapons here. We're talking about, if you look at the combat between the X-Wings and the Imperial fighters, TIE fighters, you have to line up the X-Wing behind the TIE fighter and shoot it. Like a World War II dogfight, there are no guided missiles or guided weapons here. The lasers shoot straight ahead, and your only chance of getting an enemy ship is by lining up on them. A bit like a dogfight. When approaching the trench run, there are enemy defences, and again, these aren't unguided either. They're big cannons that sort of try to shoot down the enemy ships as they fly by. bit like anti-aircraft artillery in World War II. Another thing is that these weapons seem reasonably cheap. So we see throughout the Star Wars saga that Luke treats his X-Wing like a bloody car. You know, he jumps in it to shoot off to various planets. These aren't super sophisticated, awesomely expensive weapons, and they suffer heavy losses. Most of the X-Wing fighters and the Y-Wing bombers that are used in the raid are destroyed. I think 3 survive or something like that. Most of them are destroyed. Now some of these things are quite similar to the Dambusters raid. So firstly, in the trench run, the fighters have to approach slowly and drop their torpedo at the right time to go down the port. The same thing with the Dambusters. They had to slowly move along in these lumbering Lancaster bombers and drop their spinning bombs right at the right spot so that it'll blow up the dam walls.
Negative. It didn't go in.
Just impacted on the surface.
It's gone! We've done it!
We haven't! It's still there!
And heavy casualties were suffered during this raid. You know, most of the Lancaster bombers didn't make it back. And Lancaster bombers, although, you know, at the time it was the peak of technological sophistication, Lancaster bombers were pretty cheap to make. They rolled off the factories, and thousands of them were made. So those dynamics are very similar to each other. You've got expendable weapon systems that are lost large numbers, and they use unguided weapons. A more modern comparison would be Operation Opera. That's the Israeli attack on the Iraq nuclear reactor in 1981. So the Iraq nuclear reactor, in a way, you could think of as like the Death Star. Iraq in the 80s were using their reactor to build a nuclear weapon. Nuclear weapons are sort of the mega weapons of today in our world, like the Death Star was in Star Wars. And a fleet of F-16s and F-15 fighters went to blow it up. So that's the similarities. This is where things depart. Firstly, the raid on the Iraq reactor was over in 2 minutes. 2 minutes from when Reed saw it, dropped the bomb, gone. Modern aircraft are so fast that it's over quickly one way or another. You've either dropped your bombs and you're gone, or the other side have shot you down with a missile. It happens quickly. And that would have been far less dramatic than the 15 minutes of the trench run in Star Wars, where one by one they get picked off until just Luke Skywalker's left, and it takes about 15 minutes. So that's one difference. The other thing is that F-16s and F-15s are incredibly expensive weapon systems. And remember, Israel, it's not a huge country and not a mega wealthy country. So let's say that they had heavy losses of, they would say lost a dozen F-16s or F-15s. Well, losing a dozen Lancasters, yeah, well, look, we're losing more than that every night. Losing a dozen X-Wings, yeah, it's like crashing 12 cars. Losing a dozen F-16s and F-15 fighters, that would scarcely be worse. It would be almost as worse as Iraq losing their nuclear reactor. It would be an incredible loss to the Israelis. So if that had been what had happened, you know, both sides probably would have felt it was a disaster. So it was only because they were extremely certain they wouldn't lose any that they were willing to do it. I seriously doubt the Israelis would have been willing to do it if they knew that they might have lost most of their F-16 and F-15 fighters. So that's the difference between modern weaponry. It's extremely effective, it's extremely fast, extremely expensive. So no one's willing to use them up in large quantities. No one wants to fight a war where you're going to lose thousands of weapon systems that are worth $50 million each. Lancaster bombers, you churn them off the factories cheaply. So that's, I think, we can see one similarity between Star Wars and World War II and why you have that similarity. If you've got large organisations normally are in place to run large military forces. And large military forces that go against each other are going to suffer large losses. That just isn't what happens nowadays. Certainly not for months and years at a time like you had in World War II or like you have in Star Wars, where it's just like, saga that plays out over years. The losses are just so heavy and expensive. People are either not willing to fight those wars, or occasionally when there is a war that comes along, like in the Middle East or something, it's over quickly. So if you want a war with large organisations using large numbers of war machines for a long period of time, the only thing that really makes sense is World War II technology. There's another aspect of Star Wars A New Hope which makes it clear that it's set in a World War II type dynamic. In Star Wars A New Hope, the mega weapon, the Death Star, is actually used in anger. It's used to destroy the planet Alderaan, which is seen as being allied with the rebels and the home planet of Princess Leia. They actually use it. Nuclear weapons have been used in anger in the real world, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II. That's the only time. It's the only time they've ever been used. They were developed during the course of this war. By the time they were developed, the war had degenerated into this 6-year-long bloodbath, and the side that developed them first was willing to use them to try to end the war. The other side did not have them. What happened in our world was that once the Americans used them in a war, other people wanted them to defend themselves or to deter against attack. The Soviet Union got them, Britain got them, France got them, China got them, other countries have them. It's entirely plausible in Star Wars that, geez, the Empire has this mega weapon. Maybe we should think to build our own. Now you might think, oh, the Death Star's huge. Well, the Manhattan Project was huge. The Manhattan Project was one of the biggest engineering operations ever undertaken. The Manhattan Project is, of course, the project to build the first atomic bombs during the Second World War in America. But after a while, they get cheaper, to the point where, nuclear weapons in the 50s were being churned out in the thousands. Even in Star Wars, fast forward 30 years from Star Wars A New Hope, in The Rise of Skywalker, they have Death Star technology on just Star Destroyers, and they're used to destroy a planet. That's actually, and a lot of people hate that, it's like, oh geez, it's gone over the top. That's entirely realistic. Within 30 years of a technology like that, it's likely that it's going to be much cheaper, smaller, easier to use, easier to make. So it wouldn't have been long before the rebels probably had their own Death Star technology. And they would be wanting their own Death Star technology to deter the Empire from doing exactly what they did in A New Hope, blow up a planet. But if both sides had this technology, then they're going to deter each other. Are you really going to want to wage a war? Are you really going to conquer planets? Are you really going to hunt down enemy bases when they can retaliate with their own Death Star technology? To a sort of war buff like myself, nuclear weapons and the Cold War arms race and mutually assured destruction is really fascinating. It makes for a dreadful movie. People want to see, this is called Star Wars. They want to see war. The people want to see what happens in this war. They don't want to see no war because both sides are too scared to fight, which is what happened in the Cold War. At least the two superpowers fighting directly.
Strange game. The only winning move is not to play.
So that's another aspect, I think, that suggests that Star Wars is set in the in the Second World War. And why it's set in the Second World War? The Second World War was the last time where the dynamics of two large organisations fighting each other with large numbers of weapons really made any sense. But as I talk about in my book, Big Wars, those dynamics might come back in the future. In fact, I predict they will come back by the middle of this century. If you want to find out more, check out the book. It's available for pre-order. It'll be out in October 2021. All right, that's it today. Hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. I'm going to do a follow-up on the other Star Wars movies. Let me know if there's any other movies you think that you'd like me to dissect. Have a great day. See you next time.